Betsy Hatton. I'm the Executive Director of Columbia Symphony Orchestra. We've been in existence for 32 years, and we are now finishing up our 9th season in the East Metro Gresham area. So we're really excited to have been here almost a whole decade. We are a full symphony orchestra. This is a very minor, small, not minor. None of you musicians are minor. You're all major. Haha, that was a musical joke. This is a very small portion of the orchestra. Like I said, we're a full symphony orchestra. Normally have between 50 and 65 players that plays symphonic music. And one thing that I always say, I don't use the term classical music because I don't even really know what that means. I use symphonic music because that's what we are. We're a symphony. And people say, well, I don't understand that kind of music. And I usually ask them, well, do you go to the movies? Do you like the movies? You don't go to a movie and say, I don't understand this, I'm not going to go. No, you haven't seen the movie yet. You go and maybe you like it, maybe you don't, maybe you understand it. But one thing that happens at that movie is that you listen to symphonic music 9 times out of 10. So Raiders of the Lost Ark, Elvira Madigan, all of those things, all of those pieces of music are performed by symphony orchestras. So what you hear there is what we make, which is symphonic music. And I was actually talking with Marty Stevens about the pops. Well, we talk about pops in musical terms because it's music that has just been made popular by something. Bugs Bunny, much of that music is symphonic music. William Tell Overture, Lone Ranger, that came from an opera. So all of these popular pieces were made popular because they were beloved, and they were used then in other formats. So sometimes when we talk about doing a pop concert, people can say, well, that's not really serious music. Yeah, it is. It's great music. It's just popular. So tonight we've got a little bit different take on what you normally would see if you came to a concert, because we're starting from the composition, putting it in front of the musicians for the first time ever. It's never been performed by anybody. And just so you know, none of these players have ever seen the music. It's in the composer's hand right now, and then it's going to go on their stands. So the musicians tonight are Liberty Borlée, Kenny Regan, David Bergman, Boyd Osgood, and we've got our composer, Kenny Regan. So Kenny, you want to join me up here and talk a little bit?
Yes, of course. My name is Kenny Regan, as Betsy just announced, and I go to Grant High School here in Portland, Oregon, or this is Gresham, so Portland is a little ways away. I'm used to saying Portland. I am currently a senior at Grant, and I have been composing music for quite some time, since I was 8 years old, and studying music since I was 5 when I first started practicing piano.
Okay, so tell us about your first composition. Well, you started 5 piano, 8 oboe.
Yes, that is right.
And then your first piece that you actually put pen to paper was?
My first piece that I put pen to paper was a very simple, almost pop song, but I won't call it that because it was more influenced by classical music than pop music. And it was just for piano, and it was about dinosaurs. But I was a very serious composer even back then, even if the music was simple, and I still remember how that piece goes today.
So does it just sort of rattle around in your head and fall out your hand onto the paper, or how does the creative, where does the creative germ come from, and then how does it actually trickle down to that?
Well, the creative germ comes from many different places. My own personal opinion is that it comes from the abyss and the cosmos, and you never know when or where inspiration is going to strike you. In fact, sometimes it never does strike you. Sometimes you just have little bits and pieces of compositions floating up in your head for days, weeks, months, years, lifetimes. And it's just a matter of taking those pieces and putting them together and seeing what comes out.
So this is for a small ensemble.
Yes.
What's the largest group you've written for?
The largest group I have written for and had performed was a wind ensemble of about 50 players. And after that, a chamber orchestra of about 30 to 40 players.
So how many different voices, how many lines of music for the 50 players?
So in a piece like that, you would often have between 15 to 30 parts of music. Sometimes those parts are doubled. So if you have, say, a trumpet part, you might have 3 trumpet players playing the same part, or you might have 8 violin players playing the same violin 1 part. But you have several different parts of music, and that's divided up in the ensemble in different ways.
So if you were going to liken this particular group, say, to a choir that we're all kind of used to thinking of soprano, alto, how would you define each role of the players who are up here tonight?
Well, for all intents and purposes, I would say that the high voice, the soprano voice, if you will, would be Liberty on the flute, and the alto voice would be Dagny on the oboe.
You can call her mom, it's okay.
Yes, I will call her mother. Dave playing clarinet, and really my mother here, they're not really alto and tenor voices. They're actually both more like soprano voices, but for the purpose of our performance, we'll call Dave our tenor, and we'll call Boyd on the bassoon our bass voice. Are you guys ready? I will hand this to you, and you may distribute it as you will. And I will take my seat here. I have my little cheat sheet here, because even as a composer, I still need to be able to read what my music says for some reason. All right.
What's it called?
This piece is called Quartet for Winds, because we have a wind quartet playing it. All right, it sounded pretty good, and it seems like we're all in tune. So why don't we just dive right into this and see what happens. So the tempo marked is allegretto, which means at a fairly brisk, kind of walking tempo. So for sight reading, let's go about here. We might pick it up a little bit after we've read it through. Let's see what happens. Ready? 1, 2, 1. I'll give you two bars for nothing. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, let's stop there for now. So we are a little bit under the final tempo, so it's going a little bit slower than it would be. But for now, let's just talk about some things that happen at the beginning. So first of all, there is a break where the other musicians stop playing for a short amount of time, and Boyd on the bassoon is playing by himself. So what happens is we'll slow down a little bit there, and then why don't we have Boyd lead us back in? So just give a cue to coming back in. So that's measure 12. So why don't we start right there?
At 12?
At measure 12.
Okay.
Yes. All right. Go about here for now. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Let's try that one more time. This time, why don't we take a short little pause right at the end of that line, bum, 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 and then go into it.
Okay.
All right, so 1, 2. Okay, all right. Now, do you want to try that first section a little bit faster now? Sure. Bum, bum, da 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 bum, ba da. 1, 1, 2, 1, and. Okay, now for this next section, I did something extremely mean. I made some of you play at different times as other of you. It doesn't sound too mean, but let's hear how it goes real quick. Ready? So just keep that in mind. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, let's try that one more time. Take it a little bit faster if we can. Remember to keep everything extremely light. This is very light music. I think there are a couple of strong moments, but for the most part, the notes should be short when they're not slurred, and keep everything nice and floaty so that it doesn't drag. So, 1, 2, at rehearsal mark 1. 1, 2, ready, and. All right, now before we go on, let's get a little bit picky. So going back to measure 43, you notice we've got some dynamics in there. We start soft, then we get louder, then we get softer. But a key thing to remember is that we have a pair here harmonizing on the melody, and then we have a pair here who are playing a sort of accompanying figure. Bop, 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 da, 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 da. So I would like Liberty and Boyd to listen to each other and try to match the sound. Start really quiet and just get a little bit louder and a little bit softer. And you two really let your melody soar. All right, so why don't we start right there at measure 43. Let's try that. 1, 2, ready, and. All right. Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right, let's go on to the next section. So this is rehearsal mark 2. It starts out, it's a little bit slower, and it's in 4 now. And Dave, you just give us a pickup. It's a measure, and then everyone comes in on the next measure, and he starts on beat 2. So when we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. All right, let's go back. Let's not go back to the beginning quite yet. Noticing new things. So let's go back to the beginning of rehearsal Mark II, and just try to get some more of those dynamics in there. Keep in mind, listen around to who has the melody. Da 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 da, because that's very important to make sure that line is heard over the accompaniment. Let's go through it one more time, and I'll stop you when I hear something. So from Dave's pickups on beat 2, just take it at your will. Okay, all right, right there. I am very much influenced, if you know, by jazz music because I'm a jazz pianist. I like to hear lots of louds and softs. Really, for me, there are two dynamics. There's on and off. So that's actually not my quote. I stole that. So when you get there, when you all come in at the second bar of rehearsal Mark II, da da da, ba da da. The next measure is extremely quiet. So let's try that one more time from Dave's pickups. Okay, so going back a little bit to rehearsal Mark III, it's all sounding very lovely. At the end of that first 4-bar phrase, da, 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 ba, da, da, let's have a little taper on the dynamics there, get softer. And then the forte piano, da, really bring that out. This should be quite marked from the rest of it. So let's start pickups 2, 3. I'll just give you 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Okay, all right. Hold on. I'm sorry, we didn't even get to the place that I told you about. 4-bar phrase, up and then down. Da, da, bum, 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 crescendo, and then decrescendo down. So one more time. 2, 3, 4. Okay, all right. So I didn't mark this in the music, but of course you are supposed to read my minds. I have several minds, by the way. You have to when you're a composer. It's required. Boyd, you have a response. Da-dum, ba-dum. I'd like that to be a little bit louder. You can bring that out. Okay. And then the next entrance for everybody, piano, really means extremely soft. It doesn't just mean soft there, because all dynamics are relative. Dynamics is how loud they play, in case you didn't know. You probably did know. Let's go back a few measures. Let's start in the 5th bar of rehearsal Mark III. Can we do that? The oboe has the melody. Good luck, mother. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and before we go, before we go on quite yet, let's go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 measures before the double bar. there are two people that have a moving line quarter notes, and that is Liberty and Dave. Why don't you bring that out? And then in the next measure, my mother also comes in with quarter notes. You can bring those out. But for now, anybody who does not have quarter notes moving in that section, play extra soft. All right? And the rest of you play very melodically. So starting there, 6 measures before the double bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, yes, why don't we go on? Why don't we go on? I was about to be very mean and make you do the whole thing over again, but for now, let's go on. Back to the beginning, and let's actually not take the coda yet. Let's go through the beginning as if we're playing it the first time. I just want to hear how it sounds one more time. So,
are we going from the beginning?
from the very beginning, from the very beginning, and then we'll tackle the coda in a little bit. So, up to tempo now. Ba-bum, ba-dum, ba-bum, ba-dum, ba-bum. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, hold on, just 1 second. Boyd, I believe you actually, I believe you, I'm always miss the jokes when they happen. I believe you change notes and go up to your C while they're still holding their notes. So you're the only one that moves there. So da da ba da dum, and you change as they go da 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 da, and you go up to your C there. So let's start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 measures after the beginning. Okay, so this would be marked as measure 8. Oh. Funny that. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. And then right there, again, it's extremely important because I believe the only one who has 3 consecutive eighth notes is the bassoon. So when you come in, make sure that it's right in the dum bum 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 bum, very light and fluffy. And the rest of you, make sure you're listening to that because he will set the tempo there. So why don't you start at measure 12, the infamous measure 12, right? That is where you have your little solo. So just go ahead and whenever. Okay. Getting into the nitty-gritty now, as the young people say. At the a tempo, measure 14, right after Boyd's solo, we have a nice mezzo forte. Treat that as more of a mezzo piano, because I'd like you to bring out when you get to the forte 2 measures later, dum, ba, da, 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 da. That should be very marked from the rest of it. I know I marked it staccato. I should have put some more accented notation on there. So why don't we start right there, right on measure 14.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Every good musician brings a pencil. That's what I do. I just borrow the pencils. No one ever noticed. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, okay. Why don't we try the coda now? All right? So let's go back to measure 14 once more, and this time take the coda as if you've just taken the DS from the second section. And I will have that ready in my score so that I can follow you, because obviously I need a score to read my own music. All right, measure 14. Ready? One.
Find it. I just got it.
All right.
Got it.
1, 2, 1, 2. It should be at the end of the bar.
Show me. Is it this one? Is that?
It should
where you
be
hit the
here.
A? Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I do ba-da-da-dum.
Da-da-da-dum. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Of course. Measure 14 one more time. Is that clear for everybody else?
Yeah,
You can
it
see.
should probably be a double bar.
Yeah, probably should. It's in the middle of the measure, so that's why I chose not to put one. Or of the measure, not of the measure, of the phrase. If I can learn how to enunciate. Measure 14 one more time. 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. Pretty close to the without the dynamics and the and the
Kenny,
accelerando.
I'm gonna interrupt here because I have a couple questions and I think people might be interested in.
Yes, of course.
You threw around a bunch of terms like double bar, which is not what you think it is. It's not a double at a bar. You talked about a DS.
Yes.
You also changed meters in there. And you, what else did you say? A coda.
Right.
Do you want to explain a little bit? This is a roadmap up here of what to play. And there are different signs and things. So do you want to explain a little bit about that? And also, I'm curious why you changed meter in the middle.
Sure thing. Well, if we're talking in terms of a roadmap, a double bar is sort of the line that shows you where the city or county limits are. It shows you where you are in the piece, kind of what the form is. You know, you have a little section over here, you have a little section over here. One example, if we were to put a lot of double bars in the music, so just every now and then, Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. Double bar, and then it would go on to the next phrase. So it just kind of shows you where the different sections of the music are. And then the DS and the coda. The DS happens at the end of one section of the music and tells you to go back to a spot at the beginning. In this case, I believe it's actually a DC, which is different, and I'll explain the difference. It's a DS? Oh.
It's our DS, which goes back to
So
Fascinating.
it's del segno, and segno means sign.
Yes,
So
yes
it
indeed.
takes you back to something else that's got a little mark on it.
Yes. And the sign, believe it or not, actually looks like a little S, because everyone knows the S stands for sign. The DS tells you to go back to that little sign, and then the coda is a section that happens after you've done the DS. It tells you to go further up in the music. It's very complicated for the musicians. I'm so sorry, everybody. I ask so much of you. What was the other thing that you inquired about?
Oh, why you changed from 2 beats per bar? And we'll explain meter, but why
Okay.
you went from 2 to 4?
So the meter of the piece refers to the kind of rhythm of the piece. Now, of course, at the beginning here, we have what's called 6/8 meter, which means that there are 6 beats in the bar, but we're actually feeling it as 2 groups of 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 and a 2 and a 1, 2, ba-bum, ba-da, ba-bum, ba-da. And that continues for a while. And then what happens later in the piece is it changes from a 2 feel to a 4 feel. Da 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 da. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 1, 2, 3. And the reason I chose that is because what happens in the second section of the piece, the time slows down a little bit, it gets a little bit more leisurely, and I wanted to show that there was a longer sense of where the musical line is. So having a 4 feel instead of a 2 feel, you have more beats in the measure, it is a sort of subconscious indication to the musicians to play longer and smoother than in the first half of the piece.
Yeah, we go from groups of 3s to groups of 2s. So we go yada da yada da yada da yada da yada da 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 da.
Yes, yes. That's how the beat is subdivided, is what it's called. It's broken up into different beats. 1 and a, 2 and a, 1 and a, 2 and a. So that's one way to do it when you have 3 little notes inside each beat. 1 and a, 2 and a, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then what happens later when it goes into 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, is it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The beats are broken up like that. All right? Moving on, what were we about to do? At the coda, that's right, the coda. So what happens here is just after Liberty finishes her section of the ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, we go into the coda and there's an accelerando, which means that you accelerate, which means that you accelerate the time. It gets faster. It's one of those fancy Italian words that we use for some reason. So what I would like to happen there is to have a steady accelerando, and Boyd, you can kind of lead that since you have an 8th note line.
Oh, yeah.
Da 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 bum 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 bum, and just get a little bit faster as you go into that. When it gets to the allegro vivo at measure 80, you guys can really book it. And by that I mean however fast you feel comfortable playing it. After we've rehearsed it a little bit, that would be nice. Ba-da, 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 ba-da-da, might be fine, but let's see how it goes. Why don't we start right on the coda, okay? So if we're going about here to start, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, something like that. Let's try that one more time.
Who's going to cue us? I don't know.
Let's have Liberty cue you,
Yeah,
because she's the first voice.
players do that.
It's a fluty thing to do. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. Now, once again, you're supposed to read my mind here, because this is something that I did not mark in the music. But this idea at the allegro vivo, ba-da, 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 ba-da-da, that's actually the same thing that happens at the beginning, just a little bit different. Boom, ba-da, ba-bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. So what I'd like you to do is accent that pickup note, da-da, and then make the second note a little bit softer. So do ba-da, 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 and that will kind of push the beat forward as well. So if you could mark that in your parts, if you can.
Our one pencil for our quartet.
Man,
Thank you,
we're at a 25% now. Oh,
My pistol's in the other room. I got one. I played that.
Sorry.
One of my case too.
Yeah, I do 3 or 4. You want another one? Sure.
oh, up to 50%. Wow,
We're going to go 50% faster.
incredible. All right. All right, we all set?
Yep.
Okay.
And I see there's a retard going into that.
Yeah, you can.
Or their fermata.
We'll get there. You can sort of lag on that last set a little bit, but let's try it for now, just the way you've rehearsed it so far. So from the coda. 1, 2. Right. Now, Boyd, I know that in the previous section, I believe I marked it as staccato, those last things, bum, bum. Here, I think you can probably hold them out a little bit longer. Not quite tenuto, but just with a little bit more emphasis. Da, 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 bum. If that makes any sense. So yes, the ritardando It's just very short. Ba-da, 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 ba-da-da. Just sort of a little emphasis on that last ba-da-da. I'm not singing the right notes, obviously, but that's the idea. So back to the coda at 75. Let's try it one more time with all of these things in mind. They have to think about so many things at once. I feel sorry for them. 1, 2. Excellent, excellent. Now let's try it this way. Let's go to before the DS, 6 bars before the DS. Take the DS and then take the coda when you get there. You want to try that? See if it works?
And then after we do that, I think we should probably run it, start to finish, and see how your tutelage did on these fine musicians.
Yes, indeed.
And then we want to leave some time for some questions from the audience.
Okay, excellent.
6 before the DS.
6 before the DS. All right,
Okay.
let's give this a shot. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh, wait, hold on.
Wait, did we go
The-
from the DS to the
The
coda?
coda. Oh no,
I did the coda.
we missed it in rehearsal.
Mom's based it.
So that might be a good thing to mark before we run it. You want to circle the coda very quickly?
Road maps. Longest distance high-five point.
Now there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bars between the DS and the coda.
Yeah, it
Now
is
you
pretty mean,
could
too.
have actually, there's room enough for another line on here. You could have actually written that out.
I wanted to challenge you guys. The whole point of bringing this piece was to challenge you. Oh, come on. I'm not going to make it easy. No way. Okay, are you ready
To run it?
to run it through
Let's do it.
the first performance?
Okay.
All right. Let's go. Bum, bum, ba-da, bum, bum, ba-da, about there. And why don't you cue them in? I'm not going to count you off. Excellent. Very good. Very good.
So I think all of you need to stand as well. So that is a challenge to have something put in front of you that you've never seen before, and then have it picked apart by the composer, and then try to put it back together again. So we have some time for questions, and I'm going to hand this back to Cindy and let her handle this part.
My question is, what were you thinking when you start? Do you start with the melody? Do you start with a particular instrument? Can you tell us a little bit about your process?
It's very different from piece to piece. For this particular piece, I started with the idea that I would be composing for a quartet, a woodwind quartet, so these instruments. I knew that I would have these instruments. And then I just went into a brainstorming session. It lasted probably 20 or 30 minutes, trying to think of a melody, what I wanted to do with the piece, where I wanted it to go. So what I came out from this 20 or 30-minute session was I knew what the melodies were going to be. I knew I would have 2 or 3 melodies and a couple of little different ideas that would be happening throughout the piece. And I knew that they would fit together in the format, with the first melody here, the second melody here, and then the other section at the end. The actual composing of the piece probably took about a day or so. I did it in about a few hours, so a day's work for me. And then it's just a matter of getting the parts to the musicians.
A day's work? Wow, I'd like to spend a few hours and do a day's work. Congratulations.
I would like to know the experience, each one of the quartet, the total years of experience they have had on their respective instruments.
Care to?
Tell him and he can repeat.
30 years.
30 years for Liberty on the flute.
34.
34 for my mother on the oboe.
40 off and on.
40 for Dave on the clarinet.
And do I have to do some math here? Probably 60 years.
60 years for Boyd on the bassoon.
I started when I was in high school.
He started when
And
he
I'm
was in high school.
74 now.
When he was at Grant High School.
Oh, he went to my high school. I did not know that. Oh, fantastic.
166 years.
The culmination of 166 years of effort on their instruments.
Any other questions? Sue?
So Kenny, I'm interested, what's the longest in minutes piece that you have written? And then what other organizations have actually performed your music? If you could tell us a little bit of that history.
Sure, I can go over that. The longest piece I have composed probably would be a chart for jazz combo. It was a very simple chart. It had a head and a couple of shout choruses, which means that the horns are all playing a melody that isn't the actual melody. It's more like a solo, an improvised solo that I wrote out for them. And that would probably be altogether around 10 or 15 minutes. I don't write very long music yet. The longest piece of symphonic music I've written is about 8 minutes long for full orchestra. And the longest piece of solo music I've written is about 9 minutes. That was for oboe and piano. The past organizations, I've, of course, had pieces performed by members of Portland Columbia Symphony Orchestra, which is the group we're representing today. I've had pieces played by various youth orchestras, local youth orchestras. I was a member of OPECO, which is the Organ Pro Arte Youth Chamber Orchestra. That's a mouthful. And they performed one or two of my pieces, I think, if I recall correctly. And then, of course, my high school, all of the time. I'm putting together private, independent ensembles, small groups, and then having pieces played by the large ensembles as well. So it's very varied and spontaneous. An event like this that's planned months ahead of time is not rare, but it's far less frequent than the performances I put on regularly, independently.
So very impressive. So now we're all curious, what are your future plans and where are you headed after Grant High School?
Of course. I'd like to study composition, classical composition, and do some jazz composition as well. The school that I have picked as my top choice right now is the University of Southern California, but I'm also interested in Northwestern University. I think they also have a fantastic program. I would love to attend a school of that caliber. I tended to stay away from the small conservatory environment when I was considering my options because I'd love to continue studying jazz piano and classical oboe. And there aren't very many places where you can do so many different things at once, compose in multiple genres and styles, and perform in multiple genres and styles throughout your college career. All right?
Okay, I think he's repeated that, but your instruments that you play multiple instruments, which
Yes.
seems to be common among many musicians that I know lately. And which is your favorite and most comfortable?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I like the instruments for different reasons. Jazz piano, and of course I don't do a huge load of classical work on the piano. I have done some, but I focus mostly on jazz on that instrument. It is the easiest for me to play. It is extremely comfortable. All you need to do is sit down and literally bang your fingers on the keys, and sound comes out, and it's music. The oboe, I love the oboe just as much as jazz piano, but it is much more difficult.
It's cantankerous.
Cantankerous, yes indeed. Nobody knows better than my own mother. It's temperamental, it changes all the time. Everything about the instrument depends on a small reed that you have to make by hand that's affected by temperature, humidity, and just the amount of time that you've been playing it. So the instrument, I love it, it's fantastic, it's much more difficult than the piano, so I find myself playing jazz piano more often. Does that give some insight?
It does, thank you. I was always curious about that.
It's more of a comment than a question. I'd like to comment how enjoyable this was and how proud we are of you doing this kind of thing. And I'm sure all the musicians had a lot of fun going back and forth and up and down. But it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much to everybody up here, and there are a lot more questions that I'm sure we all have about the language you were speaking, like, retardando and a few more things like that, but you can cover that as you maybe chat with these folks afterwards. Thank you for coming. We would love to be able to see you with the rest of the complement of the orchestra on March 9. There's some concert cards back there letting you know what we're going to be playing. And we are delighted as a symphony orchestra to be in this community. And I think everybody here knows the benefits of the arts. They're not only good for business, they're good for every aspect of every community that they're in. So thank you for being here and supporting us, and for supporting Center for the Arts Foundation. And we just love what we do, and we love that you love it too. So thanks.